Welcome to this webinar with the title The Strategic Power of Leaders in the Middle. My name is Geert Scheipers. I'm Professor Strategy Management at Antwerp Management School. I'm the Academic Director of the Masterclass Business Strategy and Leadership, but also the Masterclass in Care. Today I'm not just by myself. Luckily, I have my very nice colleague and friend, Professor Koen Marichal, next to me, Professor in Leadership. And together we will dive into the field of both strategy and leadership. And as you will see, we will try to integrate recent findings, challenges, and focus on the roles of the middle manager.
Thank you, Geert, for a nice introduction. So I'm Koen. I'm happy to be here for two reasons. It's a topic that's very dear to my heart because I started my leadership research when I was a middle manager in a big organization. So I worked for a decade in a complex organization with a lot of turbulence, and there was kind of rising sentiment of lack of leadership with middle management. So I got interested in what's happening here. And the second of reason is I'm here with you because these are two fields in management science that don't find each other easily. And as always with leadership, if two persons find each other, then beautiful things can happen. So I think that it's also our relation that helps us to combine that field of strategy and leadership and make it into something that's important today in organizations.
And that brings us to today's menu. So what we have on our menu for you today is first an introduction on leadership theory, and obviously I will hand on the floor to Koen for that. And where we'll also look at some different roles and changing expectations that middle managers have, our leaders in the middle. And then we'll build on strategy management theory. Our definition of strategy management is truly helpful, I think, in order to direct the roles of these middle managers and help our middle managers, managers in general, leaders in general, to truly deliver on our strategy, to realize tangible outcomes with our strategy. And so we'll talk about that. Also to help and support our leaders in the middle to create a system that can help us to manage strategy as a continuous process. Because what we often see is that strategy is something that we do once in a while, quite piecemeal, and that there is no continuous process of strategy management. Although we both believe, I'm pretty sure, that the value of strategy management is into a continuous process. And we'll talk about some of the components that will build on that. We'll end with some strategy management capabilities and hopefully also conversation on these strategy management capabilities, how they apply to the different roles and how we currently look at them. And maybe also have a future outlook of how we believe the fields, both of our fields, leadership and strategy management, can evolve. Obviously, at the end, as I said, Q&A, and I'm really looking forward to that conversation. So let me hand over the word to you, my friend.
Thank you very much, Geert. So I'm Koen Marichal. I'm Professor Leadership and Leadership Development at Antwerp Management School. And I'm happy to be here, and for two reasons. First of all, because it's with Geert. I think we share our passion to combine both topics, so strategy, leadership, and also because it's a topic that's dear to my heart, what's happening with leaders in the middle of the organizations. Because myself, I spent 10 years in the middle of a big international organization, and it was also at some point that there was more and more a kind of critical outlook towards the added value of managers in the middle. The top was really complaining about the lack of leadership. And I was HR manager at that time, so that question came on my table, increase the leadership of the middle managers. And that has been the starting point for me to start examine, do research on what's happening here in the organization. And the first thing I discovered that leadership is not a fixed idea, that if you look closely to what science says about leadership, there's an evolution, and it's important to to also be aware of the fact that leadership evolves, and if we get stuck too long in a certain idea of leadership, then that doesn't help what organizations and people in organizations need. And the first, and this is a short summary of the history of leadership theory in science. Of course, thinking about leadership has started with the first human being, or the first human beings on how to do leadership. But in science, it started, we had the first management school in 1880, and the first ideas on leadership, we call them the great man studies, and it was looking towards what makes leaders exceptional. And it was based on the idea of it are exceptional people that have the capacity to lead organizations. So we started looking at what are these personality traits that help, that we need to select to put leaders in charge of organizations. And then closely after, starting in the 50s, 60s, we had more need for people who took on leadership roles in organizations. As organizations grew bigger, we needed more managers. And we started examining, managers need to show some behavior. It's not only a question of personality. And we have the famous situational leadership, but also the leadership style theories. And starting from the 80s, we talk about positive leadership theories, like authentic leadership, transformational, servant leadership, democratic leadership. There's a whole bunch of leadership theories, and they all have in common that they have kind of a positive idea on the potential of human beings, that they have that they all have in common also the importance of self-awareness, some moral consciousness, but also the relational quality in leadership. And that's closely linked to what started in the 80s, the globalization, techno-revolution, a lot of changes, and in change you need to take people along and not just tell them what to do. That's a big shift. And then in the, as of the year 2000, we started talking about the VUCA world. Now we are talking about the Bani world. And there's a new bunch of theories that emphasizes the collective aspect of leadership. That leadership is something that is a collective asset of an organization. So there are theories about sharing leadership, distributed leadership, complexity theories, and also more and more attention for how can we make people grow in organizations. So the idea of vertical development and not only learning more, but also grow as a human being, as a need in organizations. And we'll share some key models on those more recent leadership theories. And the first one is from Professor Ulbeen, Mary Ulbeen, and that gives kind of a systemic perspective on leadership. And then starting to realize that leadership is a question of strategy, a question of structure, culture, context, positions, roles, styles, attitudes. And this model says that in organizations you have always kind of operational parts, where operational excellence becomes very important. You have always entrepreneurial parts that bring in the innovation into a system that the system also needs to be prepared for the future. And that's a classic ambidexterity we know also in strategy management. Yeah. And what more and more is needed is doing both at the same time. And that space where that happens, that we call that adaptive space, where there's both execution, attention for execution, but also for learning and reinventing. And you see it's a dotted line. That means there's some ambiguity, some maneuver room that is needed to combine both. And of course, if you think about leadership, there are different roles, responsibilities, but also different behaviors we expect of leaders in an operational system, in a more entrepreneurial part of the organization, and as enablers of innovation and change in the organization. And that also started emphasizing the importance of the fact that people who take on leadership positions see themselves also as a leader. Mm-hmm. And research says that if people see themselves as a leader, that increases the capacity, the outcome of leadership development, that people behave more as a leader if they see themselves as a leader, and also have more effectivity as a leader. And that seems a simple statement. You have to believe you're a coach to act as a coach. But if I ask in a room of 200 managers, who of you see themselves as a leader, typically around 10% raise their hands. And for me, that's the room for development we have. To work with that idea of what does it mean if you would allow the idea of me too, I'm a leader in this organization. And then we start developing leadership. And then we talk about topics like this. When do you see yourself as a leader? If your self-image is aligned with the expectations of the environment. Me, myself, I had an idea of leadership that's it's a question of executing power, of having power and making people do things. The principal agent theory I learned from you, Geert. But because I didn't see myself as someone who could do that, I struggled, I think, 10, 20 years in taking on management positions because I saw that as something I couldn't do. There was no alignment. It didn't fit me. So I struggled, and people saw me struggle and get annoyed by that. Koen, why do you struggle? And that's exactly what also deserves some attention in organizations is how do people see themselves as a leader and working with the idea, or in other terms, also paying attention to that middle part, leader identity, and how do I adapt myself to role situations and stay close to yourself. So that's one important new domain in leadership development and leadership theory.
That's another paradox, by the way. It's adaptation and at the same time being loyal to yourself and true to yourself. It's an interesting paradox, I think.
And for me, it's not a paradox because the one allows the other.
So
if
it goes
you're very
together,
clear
it's systemic.
about own position and own value, then you are able to allow more and to work more together in a flexible way, because you're clear on what's your point, what's your value, your position in the organization.
And I'm really looking forward because there is a clear link there to strategy. It's also knowing what the capabilities of an organization and being true to yourself, knowing what your talents are, and at the same time adapting yourself to the environment that is continuously changing, the demands, the needs of the customers, the stakeholders that you are engaging with that are changing. And so if you can manage that, you're doing probably very well as a strategic leader in an organization.
And if you keep continuing that,
absolutely.
Don't get stuck in some idea
that
you stay open to.
Nice.
And then we enter a bit the domain of what does it mean to lead from the middle as a manager in the middle of the organization. What is leadership then? And
because there, Koen, I think you really nailed it. So we've been struggling with strategy management continuously by looking at the middle manager trying to be supportive or not necessarily being supportive to the strategy. And then I was really inspired by your book, Leading from the Middle, and not just you, but together with our colleagues, Daan Zorgeloos and with Jesse Segers, obviously, where you have beautiful conversations online. I really like to read your letters that you write to each other. And so I thought, but finally, Koen, and probably I picked it up a bit late because it was already published in 2020, I think.
Yes.
When I first got hold on this book, I thought, now finally there is a book that really helps us to focus on strategy implementation. And maybe you can build on the core ideas in this book, because I think it might be also instrumental to people who watch us.
Yeah. I think the first white paper on the topic was 2013-14, and at that moment there was still a very negative idea about the added value of middle managers. It was also the
layer of clay,
the delayering of managers, and then there was already, and we were not the first in science. There was already some nuancing and the fact that managers are key in strategy development, innovation. And that kind of tendency to reinstore the importance of managers, but not the managers who just execute strategy, but the managers who work with the strategy and take ownership. And that's
internalize it.
that was the starting point.
Yeah.
10 years later, there was the book. So and it started from what is a middle manager, and we have a very open definition. So the distinguishing feature is not where they sit in the organization chart. So we don't have kind of an organigram. That was the question when I worked in a large organization.
Where am I?
From what salary level are you middle manager, and then you get access to other kinds of information, and you had a hat on your in the information system in SAP, and so on and so on. So this is a far more dynamic, open idea on what is it to be in the middle in the organization. And the key aspect is that you link what's happening at the top, the strategic intent, the will of the organization, to getting results and own a part of the field in the organization and make it happen. And so managers in the middle, leaders in the middle, are those who are continuously in that tension, who understand what the organization needs, the position organization, and also is in contact with the day-to-day operations in many ways. So that's the definition. So for us, like for instance, a senior HR business partner is a middle manager, or a controller can be a middle manager, or a program manager, and so on, and so on, and so on. And the key idea on what's happening in Leaders from the Middle is that the expectations towards people in the middle have become more complex, more multiple than it used to be. I think before the years 2000, what was expected is to implement strategy.
Sure, yeah.
So you
please,
got
here is the strategy, and please do start now executing it within your field.
And translate it.
Make it happen.
Make it happen, aligned. So you had to be obedient towards the top, and a driving force towards what's beneath you. It's a very hierarchical idea also on leadership. And that's still key. But we call it showrunners, and showrunners also puts in that leadership idea of you run a show, and you do that with kind of embodied way of what you want to see happening. And you run the show in many ways. It's with people, it's with a clear idea on what's happening on the top. It's with a lot of empowering leadership. It's making people believe that it's possible, and so on, and so on, and so on. So it includes the idea of change management, of empowering leadership, like the new role of the middle managers in strategy execution.
But there you say something interesting, because previously you referred to the idea of seeing yourself as a leader. Actually here you could also say, see your strategy in practice. So like embody it, as you say. So you need to frame it and visualize it, internalize it, and then you might be able to execute it or deliver on that strategy. That's an interesting one.
And by seeing yourself as a showrunner, that has a completely different sound than being a middle manager. So it's also that creating that dynamic and ownership. It's the sense of ownership, and I think if you look at leadership, that's a core element, taking ownership of a responsibility. And that's aligning, so you understand what's happening and you make it happen. The motto of the showrunner, it's also in the picture. You see there a typical showrunner, it's the show must go on. It's that feeling of I have to make this show go on, whatever happens. It's also, and then of course you have to align what you're doing with what's happening upwards, and here you see a whole different picture. It's like a leader in the middle who is in full context, who has links, ties with what's happening with in stakeholders, partners, ecosystems, wider organizational field. And it's that element of creating relations, ties, also seeing from a more collective idea what's happening, what's needed, put yourself more into the context of the organization, and not only be focused on making things happen for what you're responsible. So it's the role of the liaison officer, and a key element is there that you develop your strategic social capital, so that you make relations with people who have a larger view, have a larger responsibility, who are key in making decisions, and so on and so on. So it's not about understanding and reading the strategy, what's important, but it's also having personal relations, and I think that's something that you will also emphasize, the importance of developing relations.
Absolutely, because there I think we have a misunderstanding about the word alignment. In many organizations, alignment indeed has that vertical orientation, and often top-down, like execute it. But there's also that other element, the horizontal alignment, where you connect, and I think your picture here visualizes it very well. Being the liaison officer, making sure that all the components work together in concert in order to deliver on the value.
It's the reciprocity.
Yeah, indeed.
So you go back and forth.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of effort. So it's easy said.
Sure.
It's easy said.
That's our role, Koen. We try to conceptualize, we try to theorize, and then we help organizations and people running the show or being the liaison officer. Yeah. Now, what are the other two roles?
Yeah, but first maybe already the key takeaway is also, as we explain these expectations, people often have the reaction, and also that, and I also need to do this, and how on earth have I to do this? So a second message, it's not only the changing expectations and taking leadership in this field of expectations, but also doing it with others.
Yeah.
So for instance, liaison officer, it's not really my cup of tea, but through this work I become very aware of having someone with me who loves doing that, and then we are in it together, and we are both in our strength, and we have a larger field of influence and impact. So it's not doing things on your own. That's, I think, the key idea. It's working together. It's finding patchwork, collaboration. So also as middle managers together create a force.
And you know, Koen, that is what we recently also saw in our field of strategy, that organizations are not just there. They can no longer be successful if they only focus on themselves. They need to open up the boundaries and become part of a larger network and connect with each other in an ecosystem. There's also opening up, doing it not just for yourself or on yourself, but with others.
With others.
Yeah. Interesting one. So I think there is a very interesting field where strategy and leadership are truly interconnecting here.
Yeah. So happy with that.
That's cool.
So the third role, and then we are on the diverging side. So, and what does that mean? That you start doing things differently. You try to find solutions. You follow different paths. It's that kind of entrepreneurial side of leading in the middle, which also means that you take a bit of distance with corporate strategy, with following all the rules. So it's also the element of creating some wiggle room, cutting some red tape, but in a conscious, intentional way. So it's not just doing your own thing, of what you're convinced of and start pushing. It's being very aware of what the organization needs and wants, and also at the same time that there's some need for innovation, experiment, doing things differently, and start doing that. So there you are in doing things, because you also know if I don't do it, it will not happen.
Here you go. Creating new recipes with new ingredients. Otherwise, we will continuously to provide with the old recipes and provide also the old dishes.
And that's also a risky business, because if you start innovating, then you have the risk of having spent time, energy, even money, budget on something that doesn't work out. And then that does something with your credibility and reputation in an organization. But for at the same time, you may be onto something that becomes important for bigger or on larger part of the organization, and then you can find yourself more in the role of out of that embodied, delivered new practices, solutions for tough problems. that you become someone who has to influence strategy and challenge the strategic priorities or the way of doing things on a larger level. For me, a nice example when I saw that happening is teachers in schools 10 years ago who were already working with artificial intelligence, with digital means, online learning and so on, were typically the outcasts in school. Because the dominant teachers didn't like that and took distance and also said like that's not learning and so on and so on. And then came COVID, and suddenly those teachers were in lead, got the floor to help all other teachers to adapt to that totally new reality. And the strong schools supported them to help teachers think about how can we deliver learning, how can we deliver class without the classroom. But that is tough work because it touches on the essence of what a school is. You have all the debate, can we be a school without being together in a classroom, and there are all the convictions, assumptions. It touches also on the power.
Very good.
For instance, the teachers who had kind of the informal leaders at that time suddenly felt, wow, we are becoming laggards. We have, so those dynamics, the role of the strategic challenger is that political arena. So the powers that be, how can I start influencing and working with that to help the organization as a whole adapt to a new context? So that's the fourth role. And I think that's kind of an overview. And typically when we start developing leadership, because that's it's less the question, what is leadership? The question, how do we develop leadership, or how do we create a context in which people can learn and develop their leadership? We work typically with those kind of questions. Where do you find yourself in the middle? What is the intention of the organization? Does the organization want more show running capacity, or does it want more innovative, enabling innovation capacity, or does it want more liaison capacity? For instance, after COVID period, a lot of organizations had to work on the restoration of the liaison between middle and top.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That was really a working point. They lost touch with each other. So those questions are important in organization leadership capacity. What do we need, and how do we restore, and how do we want to let the relation evolve between middle and top in the organizations? And it starts with questions like this. And also learning your own preference, and it's okay to stick with your preference as long as you empower also the other to take on the role that's also needed. Instead of getting frustrated that not everybody is behaving like you are.
Where probably the value is not necessarily, as you said, doing things with each other. Oh, interesting, Koen. Absolutely, it's a great. And by the way, this is a nice segue also to what we see, what we do in strategy, because a good strategy starts from a set of good questions. And lately, we even call it the crux. Identifying not just the challenges of an organization, or look at very traditionally the opportunities and the threats, no, but translate them in challenges, but even more the crux. What are these true essential knots that we need to identify and then reflect on, engage in a conversation with our leaders in the middle in order to address the necessary themes for the future and develop that, translate that into a strategy. And what you laid out is quite humbling also for us as strategy managers, because we also know that some things in the field are quite traditional as we did them, and not necessarily that the tools and the techniques that we applied and the theories that applied have to be fundamentally thrown away, not necessarily, not at all, I would say. But we need to think about what are the underlying paradigms. And I think here in Antwerp Management School, we've been trying to do so for quite a while, because I think our fields really touch upon each other, and we should integrate them, merge them even more. Both of our fields are interesting, but we should see where the systems are at play and how can we build a better system for organizations, for people within organizations, for the stakeholders, maybe also for society at large.
Yeah.
If I may, I want to share you
Wonderful.
something.
Yeah.
Really looking forward to that, actually. And what you pointed out, and by the way, I was struck by one of the phrases here in the book, where you write, we want to actually have a human orientation rather than a unilateral strategic or structural perspective. It's a literal quote from your book. And then I thought, oh, but Koen, what have we been teaching here? And didn't you hear what I was trying to say? Maybe I was not clear enough. And maybe some of the things in our field were not transposing to our audiences. Or maybe, as we said, some of the recipes that we were applying were still the old recipes. Because I think here we always have had a human orientations to strategy management. We can never take out that human aspect, by the way, that also brings in serendipity, that brings in that ingenuity, that brings in that wisdom aspect in strategy, I think, which we truly need. And so we see also strategy management as a human activity, for sure. But you're right, we need to be very clear on where the origins are in strategy management. And it is quite top-down traditionally. The showrunner was kind of the only person that we needed, for sure in the beginning. And that is because we looked at organizations quite from a very transactional perspective. And it's called transaction theory, where we just say we have to contract on things that we need to do. Organizations contract with their stakeholders, among which also the members of the organization, the employees within the organization. And these contracts need to be drafted, but at the same time they need to be managed. And it comes always with a cost to manage these contracts. And we minimize the cost of these contracts and try to minimize cost, meaning also dysfunctional behavior. It does something with people within an organization. Because if you use these terms like cost and dysfunctional behavior, actually, whatever you design, it leads to an orientation on cost and dysfunctional behavior. And we lose out all the, what you also showed in the timeline that you presented on leadership, is that positive approach to leadership. Now, we should not be naive, but we should, I think, also allow for the not necessarily economic orientation to it. And there I think lately we've been talking about purpose in organization. And we all know that organizations have been established to deliver on a purpose, but also need to have a conversation on what is that purpose and are we aligned on that purpose. So I think, the transactional approach needs to be revisited for sure. And I think in that respect, we have a good definition here at Antwerp Management School on strategy. And it also builds on some of the references that you use in the book here. And I really like that, because we believe that strategy is not something that you write on paper or that you just communicate in your town hall meetings. We believe that strategy is a mental model. It is between our ears, and it resides between our ears. So what we need to do is to make it explicit. And by making it explicit, we can really describe how we want to be successful. Because I think that still holds. Organizations can be successful. What that success is not necessarily just to be expressed in monetary terms or in economical terms. Not necessarily it is like market dominance or world leadership. It can also be like developing students and pupils in the best possible way. Make them like critical but also constructive citizens of tomorrow. That can be the role of, for example, a school. So if we describe how organizations will be successful in such a mental model, we need to make it explicit. But the most important thing is that we also need to make it shared. And I think your roles, both even as the showrunner, also the enabler, but I think also the liaison officer and the strategic challenger, if you look at the four perspective, all of them require for what I would call later on a strategic dialogue to develop on that explicit shared mental model. And as you also say, make it into a continuous process. You continuously use it to evaluate, are we doing the right things? And make decisions out of that take actions. We need to ensure that we take actions, that we do things with our strategy. Because if not, it's just a great story. And people like stories, but you need to translate your story into tangible value. And that's also what our students want. That's also what organizations want from us. Exactly. So that's our definition of strategy. And it really helps us to work with the organization on not just formulating strategy, but also on executing strategy. And in delivering on strategy, so executing strategy, we always strive for performance. Again, whatever performance that we want to realize. And it's a combination of both strategy formulation and strategy implementation. So I think we cannot take them apart. And that's also an old paradigm, maybe building on old perspective on middle managers. It's just the top things, and indeed, the middle managers have to execute. And they are the hands or the body that moves, and then the brains are somewhere residing in the boardroom or in the executive executive offices, mostly corner offices at the highest levels of a large building. But that's not true. We want our people also to think and to reflect and to sense and to give meaning to whatever is happening within an organization. And so quite recently, I stumbled upon an interesting meta review, a structured literature review, that actually comes with a good orientation towards performance. Because what was the challenge? And maybe some of you also refer to that quite often. That is, performance is quite vaguely defined. There's no common definition. And so based on 239 theories, a recent Marshall came up with a comprehensive view on what strategy meant. And when I was reading that quote, I thought, but here, when we talk about connecting, maybe infusing, combining strategy and leadership, I thought, but now we found it. They come up with that concept of what they call core. So both strategy and leadership focus on three components. It's having capabilities, the C from core. It is about roles, the R from core. And it is about relationship, the RE at the end, the relationships. And there, I think it mirrors in a way, where we have strategies these days, we build them on the capabilities of an organization. We translate that into structure processes, a clear narrative, but it also needs to deliver on a clear business model. What we often translate into these transactions. Remember my transaction cost theory. But if you then link that back to leadership, that I thought, okay, capabilities on the individual level, they relate to knowledge, skills, and abilities. Structures and the processes, they relate to the role, and the role that you have as a leader, as a manager, as an actor, an agent within an organization. And then transactions, we should probably look at them as type of relationships. And I think if we can build on a model of an organization where both strategy and leadership come together, we can truly deliver on performance. And now we can even say it is literaturally underpinned, because that core model can help us with that.
Do they make themselves the distinction between strategy and leadership?
No, they don't do that.
You added.
I added, because for me, what they do is what you did also previously, what we often do in these reviews, that is, look at the top one as the firm level, but for me that is strategy. And then the individual level, that is how I now translated it to leadership. But there I think leadership and strategy are linked together. Yeah.
I love the idea of linking relations and transactions. I think that's really core in success of organizations. That you always take both into account.
And there I think this model can also help indeed,
Yes.
absolutely. It's the combination of these things, it's the unification of these elements. And knowing that the different components are important, because also on the left side, Koen, I think capabilities and at the same time knowledge, skills and abilities, organizations need to be very well aware of what their capabilities are. But as individuals, we need to know where our talents reside and open up with colleagues to build on talents or to combine talents and doing it with others rather than doing it to them. And I think that brings us to the central part in this model, where roles and structure and processes. I myself, I'm not that happy with that reference to structure and processes, because that's for me, structure follows strategy is what we often say, and it's a very kind of material and technical and tangible look at strategy. For me, there's much more, also even in organizational design, and more importantly, organizational dynamics, than just the formal elements, the tangible elements. But I think it's an interesting reference that I wanted to share with you and with our audience here. Now, if we build on that core idea, when we fuse strategy and leadership here together, or as we say, at the firm level and the individual level, what strikes also in what you explained about leadership for me, Koen, is the element of a dialogue or exchanging information and listening to each other. Maybe we can refer there to Theory U by Ulrich, I think it was. And I think, the profound listening is so important in organization. You referred in your timeline also to VUCA and Bani. That refers to the current situation that we all live in, that we have to operate in, that we have to manage our organizations or lead our organization. And many of us live in quite complex environments. And there are multiple dimensions to complexity. It is dynamic in terms of where innovation and change is, and how we deal with innovation and change. That links it back to your enabler and strategy challenger roles, I think. There is that element of logical complexity where cause and effect are distant. And there I think, your showrunners, but also your liaison officers are quite important. And there is that social complexity that probably builds for all four of the roles, where different views and interests need to be aligned. And we come to that, what we define, explicit shared mental model. And so therefore I think a dialogue is quite relevant for us. Now, when we had that conversation in preparing for this webinar, you said, Geert, dialogue, yes, but what about inclusion, is what you said. And can you build on that, Koen?
For me, the word dialogue struck more like a very open conversation, with not necessarily a result. It's having an open, like we are having.
But it leads to somewhere, Koen.
Well, if
there is a direction.
If it's led, if the dialogue is led, and then I was thinking about the word inclusion, because there is an intention of including. And that's the work of leaders. I think, and it fitted for me the necessity of working with complexity, change, different roles, always including, also like almost in the shared mental model.
Here you go.
It's like including people always again and again, and it's for me a different notion than having a dialogue. Having a dialogue is everybody has his point of view,
to everything.
And
Okay, but that's a good one.
But you need, of course, dialogue to have relational quality in organizations.
And to give it direction, Koen, if I may call it like that, because in my mind now, I call it give it direction, leading to something, as you call it. I think we use the concept of an engaged coalition. So the group that we have that dialogue with is a group of people who are engaged to deliver on the purpose of that organization. So bringing together that engaged coalition, building on their leadership capabilities, but then designing strategy together, I think was the intent of this dialogue. But thank you for sharing. We always learn
and
from each
that
other.
theory, the model I showed from Ulbin, it's also called complexity theory of leadership. So there's that same thread that's coming in science also is becoming very apparent and manifest.
And that is an interesting segue, Koen, to another quote that I wanted to bring. And you talked about wisdom, I think, wisdom in leadership. And Nonaka and Takochi, they are quite well known scholars in the field of strategy management. They a couple of years ago, 2021, so it's a year after your book came out, Koen, they came up with a book and they called it The Wise Leader. And they say, actually it builds also on your definitions of leaders from the middle, where you have that wisdom of providing direction, giving coming to a comprehensive shared model, but at the same time making it quite operational. Linking it, I think, in your definition was to the day-to-day activities of an organization. And for them, the wisdom of a leader is, giving that comprehensive view of leading towards that future, framing the future, so to speak, but at the same time making it very tangible today. Now, but this creates some challenges, and if we do some research on strategy management, we often see that if you have a strategy and getting it realized and translated into that performance and in the way we define it now throughout that core process, it is quite challenging to really deliver on your strategy. Make strategy management a process that creates effect. And so there is a lot of things that have been shared about, and sometimes also quite cynical, so to speak. And that is really what I try to help organizations with, to overcome that cynicism and maybe also even the apathy which might also exist in organizations. You can say it is difficult to execute on your strategy. It is difficult to implement your strategy. It is difficult to manage your strategy, or quite hard, but that doesn't mean that we should not do it. And by the way, if I looked at the research on failures in strategy management, and where strategy was greatly formulated but not realized or with poor results, you see actually a decreasing line here, where in the beginning there are referenced even up to 90% of failure rate. We now, and you see a clear decline here at 44%, so maybe we just have to work a bit longer and a bit harder. Maybe there will be a zero strategy failure rate.
But that's because the definition of strategy changed.
Maybe also. Why?
Well, that professors start talking about strategy as a dialogue. So,
so
the dialogue can't fail. The dialogue can't fail.
That's true, but your results can be disappointing. Your results can be disappointing.
Yeah, but if you look at the more dynamic idea on strategy, then it's always an evolution. You adapt,
and you learn
you
continuously.
adapt your expectations.
Yeah.
So maybe in the 80s it was still like, these are the targets and we have to get them, and you could measure.
Yeah.
But if you have a more adaptive idea of targets and you let them evolve with what's happening, you stick closer to reality, then you maybe have less that experience of failure, because you have more the feeling of you are learning and adapting.
It's true, I agree there, but then I still think we can measure the performance of an organization in terms of, are we delivering on the purpose as we explained it to be?
Or how do you measure adaptation? How do you measure learning?
Yeah.
Because that's hindering often the learning capacity of an organization, because the key indicators still push for results and not for the process of learning.
Absolutely.
So there's...
Absolutely.
And the thing I forgot was Weick sense making.
Sure. Yeah, which I also touched
that was
upon.
also on the definition. I think you showed that sense making, and I think that's a very critical competence.
Yeah.
How do you make sense, and how do you create meaning, like leaders as meaning making machines?
Absolutely. And continuously adapt to the changes in your environment. And again, there is a great segue, because I think we cannot leave that just to chance, just to random luck. We need to organize for that, and I think also that is the benefit of your book. Keep optimizing it. But the book then provides for me these different roles, where we all as leaders in the middle can reflect on what is our role, and that we can adapt to it, as you say. So what we look at from a systems perspective, we call it an integrated strategy management system. It is that we start with the mission, the goals, and the critical success factors. So that is that explicit shared mental model. But then we have to translate it into something in order to deliver on that performance. It doesn't come just by itself. And that builds on a couple of levers. We formally called them levers of control, but then again, for me also was kind of top down. It much more was like, we give it to the showrunner, for example, and then they have to execute. But Koen, while I was reading in your book, I also thought, but we already had that idea of that liaison officer, and even the strategy challenger, maybe also the enabler. The enabler, I think it was already in the diagnostic systems. So where we measure things, where we evaluate, where we set targets and stuff like that. And maybe also in the cultural element, because I think the enabler really needs to link with other people and really needs to try to shift the needle, but from the local perspective there, and from within his personal realm. So there I think the diagnostic and the cultural element are already there. But then the strategic challenger, but both the enabler as well, I think, they can build on what we call interactive control. And interactive control is to identify information that we can learn from and that we can use in order to optimize on our strategy. And so that is what you pointed out, like, hey, we've been changing the definition of strategy. I would not call it the definition of strategy, but we've been changing the approach to strategy and the way we deal with strategy. And delivering on something that is really tangible, that leads to results, for all stakeholders involved, and by the way, also supports society at large from our perspective. But at the same time, we make that into a continuous process there. And so these elements are there. The older ones, what the showrunner needed, and maybe also the liaison officer, like structure and clear boundaries, they are still there. But if we combine them and if we tune them, that is what we try to depict here with our levers here, I think we can translate strategy into a system that will lead to performance. Now, by doing that, obviously, in that system, you can also identify where do we need to adapt. And that is, again, there, like making this into a system, making it into a living organism where strategy continuously has to be adapted and where we learn continuously. And obviously, when it delivers on the value that we created, we can also infuse our strategy with new resources. We've built new capabilities, we have new, what type of resources, it can be tangible resources, even monetary resources, but also data insights, more legitimacy from an organization, so the willingness from the society to provide the organization with a place in the arena, then I think we can use that again to infuse our strategy and then translate it again to the system. And so this also needs to be a continuous process where we all look at, like a human being, where we continuously need to adapt and stay fit. And maybe that idea is like we should manage a system of fitness where we as an organization can stay fit. And that builds on some strategy management capabilities, and we wanted to end this webinar also by providing some clear directions. If we then distill from whatever we've been sharing with you what is important, I think we believe in these capability buildings, the knowledge, the capabilities, the ability of an organization and as an individual, both on these two levels, I think, from these two perspectives that are important. The first one is about clarity and commitment to whatever you defined as your strategy, maybe even more importantly, the purpose that you have. Secondly, that leadership and the capabilities of that leadership, where there's also accountability, because our approach to strategy is not a faint one. It is a quite strong one. We need to pick up our roles. Both the liaison officer, the showrunner, the strategic challenger, and the enabler, they want to make a difference for their organization. So I really like that. We also have robust and actionable strategy roadmaps where the clarity of strategy becomes clear, and that is different from a liaison officer, from a challenger, and an enabler as a showrunner. So don't just think that the roadmap is just something for the challenger, I think. We need to have a process, a system, as I explained, and that needs to be efficient and agile. Then we might use metrics, for me also, to measure the output of the strategy and see whether it delivers yes or no, a set of KPIs, monitoring system there, and most importantly, well, maybe I should not say most importantly, but quite close to us, and where for sure strategy and leadership meet each other, and the leaders in the middle have a very important role to fulfill. It's the element of culture, and the culture of continuous learning and continuous improvement, I think. I like
quite a summary.
It is. Thank you, Koen. It was a pleasure for doing this together with you. And we quite a summary, but we spoke a lot. I had some fun, but maybe our audience also shared some questions with us, and so maybe it's time to open for Q&A here.
Yes, indeed. We have a couple of questions. First one goes for Koen, actually, if we look at the axis with the 4 different roles, do you, as a person within an organization, leading from the middle, do you ideally dispose of all these 4 different roles? Is that realistic even? Or should you rather focus on 1, 2, maybe 3? What's your opinion there?
It's a great question. You are very clear on that. And if I showed you the pyramid on leadership development, you have the level of competence, skills, knowledge, you have the level of identity and self-regulation, and then you have a level of adult development, which puts things in your perspective on a longer time horizon. And in the middle, self-regulation means that the minimum level in leading in the middle is that you can regulate yourself in those 4 roles in the middle of an organization. So you have the minimum capacity of both 4 roles. I think that's a no-brainer. And then you have to specialize in certain of these roles. And I think if you grow in impact in your organization, that you also learn and develop and grow into the 4 roles before having a larger capacity to carry a responsibility in an organization. But then that's a choice. Do I want to evolve? Do I want to grow into the 4th roles? Or do I specialize more in, like me, I specialized in the enabling, and in Dutch I like it better. It's like space maker room.
Mm-hmm.
This is the person who makes space, who makes room for innovation, and that's more my preferred role, and I stuck to that, and which is perfectly okay. It's clear, and I think is a key message. Be clear.
And that builds also on that element of authenticity where we spoke about, because you
Yeah.
need to know what your capabilities are, what is close to you. Wow, Koen, thank you very much. What an inspiring conversation. I really enjoyed today's session, and I hope our listeners and our watchers also learned a lot, but also enjoyed the atmosphere and the dynamics between us, because that interaction truly played out, I think. So thank you very much, of all my heart. And for all of you, also thank you very much for joining us. It was inspiring being here together with you. And if we inspired you, and if you want to continue this conversation also with us, please do not hesitate to reach out to us, both to Koen and myself, or reach out to our learning and development advisors here at Antwerp Management School. So thank you very much, and hope to see you next time here on campus or in the field of strategy and leadership.